Presidential Wealth Management. If you've ever had an idea that you think could make you the next Jeff Bezos or the next Elon Musk, stay with us as we look at what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur. Thank you for waiting for us a few minutes. We had a technical glitch or two, and we think we've worked them out. Welcome to the Eagle's Nest webcast. This is my trusty old-fashioned Webster's Dictionary. And Webster defines entrepreneur as one who organizes and assumes the risk of a business or an enterprise. But think about that for a minute and realize that it raises some questions. Questions like, for example, are there certain personality types that are more likely to be successful entrepreneurs? Are there certain characteristics or backgrounds that successful entrepreneurs have in common? And what are the odds? How many failures are there for every successful business that's started by an entrepreneur? Our guest is Kevin Heipel. Kevin is a professor of entrepreneurship at Metro State and CU Boulder's Leeds School of Business. Kevin has experience as a corporate accountant, an assistant attorney general, an author, and as an entrepreneur. Kevin, welcome. First thing I'm going to do is do what I call a last question first. Okay, here we go. I want you to do a quick answer to a long question. Of all the cases you've studied, all the people you've encountered, and all the successes you've seen, what's the single most important characteristic, trait, or skill that successful entrepreneurs shared, and why was it so important?
It's the ability to pivot. And what we talk about with pivoting, it's that as an entrepreneur, you have an idea that this business is going to go a certain way, or you certainly have a lot of hope, you have a lot of belief. But the reality is it never goes as planned. There's things that you didn't see that come up. There's some things that go better than you expected. But when you get hit with the wall, it's the ability to recognize it and pivot. And pivot's our educational word for being able to change course. So COVID's a good example. We have some retailers now that are filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy because they were not able to pivot because of COVID. But we have other businesses that are thriving and doing well. Around my neighborhood, we have restaurants that have closed. They're gone because of the quarantine. We have other restaurants that are probably more successful than ever because they were able to pivot. They were able to get to do takeout. They were able to reach the customer. They were able to accommodate what had happened in the environment. And so that's probably the number one thing if you're going to be long-term successful.
Wow. More with Professor of Entrepreneurship, Kevin Heipel, in a moment on this Eagle's Nest webcast. I'm Keith Weinman with Taylor Leary from Presidential Wealth Management.
This is awesome. I'm particularly fascinated with the world of entrepreneurship. I love working with entrepreneurs myself. And it's just a world that, I feel like it takes a certain personality to be a real hardcore entrepreneur. And I think today's going to be an enlightening conversation with Kevin, and we're going to dive into it. But before we do that, I want to provide a little bit of housekeeping items so we can be as successful and engaging as we possibly can be. For our audience today, we do have a chat feature on today's webcast. So the chat feature is going to be private in nature. So only the three of us are going to be available to see those chats. It's not going to be public to the open forum. So if you have questions, plug that into the chat feature, and we'd be happy to answer those questions as we go. Today, we're not going to do any polls. We want to just dive right into the entrepreneurship, but also we have a offer for you. And of course, it's not a webcast without a little bit of an offer here. But one of the things that we do is we bring in a whole host of different talents, different ideas. And we love working with entrepreneurs, specifically business owners and professionals that are out there in the world. And we'd love to understand what their financial situation looks like. And if you find that maybe some of the topics today are relevant to you and maybe want to dig into them, these are things that we would love to talk to you about. So schedule some time with a one-on-one call with one of our advisors. It might be myself, it might be Keith, or one of our other experienced and caring advisors here at Presidential. And we'd love to schedule that one-to-one call to see how we can serve you best. As entrepreneurs, you serve your clients, and we do the same on ours. I think we would be called the intrapreneurs of the world. So with that, we'll just dive right into it. So Kevin, thank you so much for being on today. One of the things that we talked earlier, kind of setting this thing up, is just the different elements of entrepreneurialism. You talked to me about 3 core kind of tenets, so to speak. What are those kind of things that an entrepreneur has to have in order to go into business?
Well, I think anytime that you're looking to launch a business and you want to be successful, the first thing is if you can solve a problem. What problem is it that you solve? Even if you're a real estate agent, you are solving the problem helping people find housing. And the better you can define it, the better success you'll be. There's some realtors in my area. I live in Ken Carroll Valley. There's a realtor highly successful, and her area is Ken Carroll Valley. And so when she thinks about the problem that she solves, it is finding homes for people who want to live in Ken Carroll Valley. So the more specific you can be with the problem, the more likely you are to attract people to you. The next thing you want to do is market your competitive advantage. So using this realtor as an example, her competitive advantage is one, she lives in the area. She's sold more homes than anyone else in the area, and she can usually get the homes sold before they even come out to market with it. And so she promotes that in her advertising, that these are her competitive advantages that she has as being a realtor in Ken Carroll Valley. And then the last one is nurturing your clients. And it's especially important for her because you buy a home, but then you end up moving, you want to upgrade, you have a larger family, or you're moving out of the area. And if you nurture the clients, you stay involved with them, you get the referral back, or you get referrals from other friends. You could approach it like, well, I sell the home, that's it, I'm never going to check in with these people again. Right. She doesn't. She stays in constant contact. She does things for the community. She's always out there and aware so people don't forget her. It's surprisingly, I saw a stat one time, it said the reason that 80% of the people don't come back to you, do you have any idea what it is? The number one reason why people don't come back to you?
They lose touch or they get talked to by another person, I would guess.
Similar. What are you going to say?
Keith?
Well,
it would be the same thing, that they haven't had contact with you. Taylor said it very well, stay in touch.
Yeah, they forget you. They forget you exist because you're right. You don't stay in touch. You're not there. You're not reminding them. Even local restaurants have this problem. There's a Mexican restaurant down on the corner that I used to go to all the time. I never go back. It's not that the food's not bad or the service is bad. It's all fine. It's just for some reason I forget about it.
That it's there.
And it's not on my normal thing. But the Mexican restaurant across the street from a Starbucks that I drive by every day, that's the one I go to because I remember it. And the other one's equally as good. And that's the big problem. You got to nurture clients even after the sale or during the process, or they will just forget about you and they don't come back.
Yeah, that's so interesting. In our business, it's really transitioned over the last, couple decades, and more so even the last 10 years, to, really, in my opinion, benefit the client. And, it's no longer about the transactional business. It's about the relationship business. And it sounds like you're saying that to be a successful entrepreneur, you've got to, cultivate and nurture those relationships.
Right. I used to have a bankruptcy firm, and I'd have clients, they put down money, they made deposits, they were along in the process, and then they would just disappear. And it was because they forgot and we weren't reaching out.
Mm.
Then as soon as I started doing like an email drip campaign, just one email a week, different things about bankruptcy, whether it applied to their case or not, just little tidbits of information. After I did that, I realized they kept in the process. They stayed with it.
Mm.
They came back, and then it makes you wonder. It's like, well, God, how many forgot about me and
Right.
don't even know that they gave me money and I was supposed to help them?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background. You have such a diverse background and has led you down a particular path. So give us a little insight of how you ended up being an entrepreneur yourself and what led you to be a teacher of entrepreneurialism.
Well, it's kind of a variety of things. I mean, I graduated from the University of Colorado. I had a finance accounting degree. My first job was being a business analyst at NCR Corporation. And I got in charge of this billing department that was absolutely a mess. I mean, the past dues were over 120 days. There was no process for collecting the money. They had just started a new software system, but the staff didn't know how to use it. And I would probably say that was my first entrepreneurial experience. I was within the company, but nobody was telling me what had to be solved or how to solve it, basically. They said, we need to get the receivables under 30 days. Go do it. And so then I had to come up with a variety of things in which to do. A lot of it was training the staff, putting in a process, using Excel, which was brand new at the time. And, everybody thought it was crazy to be using technology like that. I did that for about 3 years. AT&T bought them. They were doing buyouts at that point. I really wanted to go to law school. It was always my plan to be a lawyer. I thought I wanted to be a litigator. I thought, that's where the action was. And so when the merger happened, it was a good time to leave. So I went back to CU Boulder, graduated from law school. And while I was at law school, I was an assistant attorney general for the state of Colorado. Did that for about 5 years, and I had an interesting job where I was prosecuting licensees like chiropractors and dentists and nurses. Anybody who had a license who ran afoul of the Practice Act, I was the attorney that handled it. And it was another one of those situations where it presented an entrepreneurial experience. I got assigned to the State Board of Chiropractors. They had a backlog of cases that I think there were over 50 at the time. I was going to be the only attorney to handle them. And basically it was the same thing like NCR, resolve the backlog. They didn't say how. They didn't really offer much assistance except, go get them, Tiger. And so it was at that point, I had to start coming up with kind of creative ideas in which to do it. And so what I did, instead of just filing the papers and starting the litigation, I would take the chiropractors and we would go into mediation. So it was nothing really revolutionary, but it was an existing process that was out there that once you would file the case, they would send it to mediation after you did discovery and you had all the expenses. But what I decided to do, rather than incur the expense in getting the chiropractor all upset that, this legal action's been filed against them, we'd go to mediation right away. And I'd take a board member with me because I didn't know chiropractic at all. I knew the law. And I would have the board member sit with the chiropractor and they would talk about what was going on. What was the problem? What needed to change? And I tell you what, within a year, we had all those cases backlogged. And so that got me on the map where I got hired by Department of Regulatory Agencies, who was in charge of all the regulatory boards. So before I was the attorney, now I'm a section director in charge of all these boards. And so then at that point, I created what we called the Office of Expedited Settlement. So rather than send the case to the Attorney General for prosecution, we would handle it in-house and we could see if we could get it resolved in a way that satisfied all the parties. And that probably saved, at the time, about $5 million, resolved a backlog of cases. So I was there for 5 years. I worked for the Bill Owens administration. He was term limited out. New administration came in, different political parties, so it was customary for people in my position to resign, which I did. At that point, I started a law firm. It was me, myself, and I was doing administrative law. So what I figured I would do is I figured I would just start representing the chiropractors and the doctors and the dentists.
Oh, interesting.
It was going okay. It was really hard to network, to get to know them. when you're the prosecutor, and now you're going to be their friend, they're a little leery of you. That's like, I don't know if they really had a lot of trust. And so this was in July of 2007. A buddy of mine from law school, was a bankruptcy attorney in Arizona. And he said, with your finance accounting background, you got to get into this. He goes, it's really a numbers driven thing. He goes, I think you'd like it. I said, all right. I go down, I spend a week with him. And the one thing that he was doing that no other attorney, or definitely a bankruptcy attorney, was doing, is they were advertising on pay-per-click. So he was just a two-man firm. He was doing pay-per-click advertising. He taught me the law. We built a website together. He taught me how to do my own pay-per-click advertising. We launched it when I was down there. That Monday when I got back, I think I had 7 appointments scheduled already. I was booked out for the next 2 weeks. And I wish I could say that, I saw the economy, that we were going to have this housing crisis, and that's why I went into bankruptcy. I didn't. But within 4 months of starting that practice, that's when the Great Recession began. Wow. And the number of foreclosures took off. And so I found myself in the position of, one, being the attorney who's advertising, and then having this event that was just creating a high number of bankruptcies. And so I went from being a one-man firm to within 2 years being the largest filer with 20 employees and having revenue near $5 million a year.
Amazing.
And I think my first year I had 50,000.
So many questions.
Sure.
Kevin, okay, questions that we'll get to. First, entrepreneurship has been with us almost since the beginning of time. Right. Go back like to the movie Gladiator, or, for God's sake, go back however far you want. There was always somebody building a business trying to trade or sell something or create value. One of the questions that I had for you, are we born with the traits to be successful entrepreneurs, or they can be learned? You have demonstrated here in the last, about 4 minutes answering a question. You were born with it, buddy. I mean, every job you've ever had, you've entrepreneured within the job. That's just very clear. That stands out. So here's the question. Are there certain types of personalities that are more likely to be successful as entrepreneurs, and other types of personalities that are least likely to be successful as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, I think some of the key personality for success is, passion. A big one is motivation. Another one is questioning why. Why do we do it this way? When I worked for the government, it's like, well, this is how we do it. I'd be like, well, why do we do it that way? Well, it's all the way we've always done it, It's like, well, that ain't working. In case nobody's figured it out. Like, I don't think I'm not a creative entrepreneur. I'm not the unicorn. I'm not Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. I can't come up with those ideas. But I can look at something and I can be like, that just doesn't make sense. There's got to be a better way to do it. And I think that's the hard part when I teach students. Either you see life that way, that you see there's opportunities, you see there's another way to do it, or you just see life as black and white. That's just the way it is. And I think if you're stuck in a black and white mentality, you could be an entrepreneur. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. And I think where you're going to have the biggest challenge is what I talked about earlier. You're going to have a hard time pivoting. Because if you see the world as black and white and you go into it because right now everything's black and black's good for you, but then the world turns to white and white's not good to you, or you even think white is wrong, then you have a hard time pivoting because you're so upset about that it changed. It was black, but now it's white. What happened here? This isn't fair. This isn't right. I can't do that. Whereas an entrepreneur, you got to be like, well, that happened. I didn't see that coming, but time to move.
And you're describing the times we live in now, for God's sake. Nobody could have predicted what
No.
all that we've encountered in the year 2020. And yet, I don't know, something inside me has said, okay, it's change. We sit around thinking, what's the new normal? Well, maybe we'll know when we get there. Maybe we won't. But in the meantime, things are changing that we never thought would change. And it seems to me, I don't know where I got the idea, but where there's change, there's always going to be opportunity. And it's the entrepreneurial spirit that then finds and develops and exploits that opportunity. Correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're doing a Zoom call right now, and we've had Zoom for several years now, and we've had medicine for several years. But now with COVID, we have telemedicine. We have televeterinarian medicine.
Really?
We have telehealth. I mean, I met with my doctor yesterday, and we did it on Zoom. And I told her what was going on, and she went through her list of questions and called in the prescription, and it was great. I was sitting in the same chair as I'm talking to you, and I didn't have to drive down to National Jewish. Those technologies were there, but because something came unforeseen, like COVID, it created an entrepreneurial opportunity where people are like, oh, yeah, telehealth. And so I think you'll see a big boom in it with, patient confidentiality and maintaining records. And, we'll probably get to the point where Bluetooth can take your blood pressure. I mean, who knows with it? But, the idea has been launched that it's possible, where if you asked the healthcare industry 7 years ago, can you do telehealth? The insurance company's like, well, no, we're not going to pay for that. That's not the practice of medicine. Now it's like, hey, this is saving a lot of money. We may not have to build so many big hospitals and brick and mortar, and we can offer these services.
Wow.
So yeah, when changing with the times is always going to be the number one key to a successful entrepreneur.
So you're in a college setting a lot of times, and obviously right now probably even more bizarre than ever, being a college professor. But I'm sure you see a lot of the Gen Xers, the tail end of the millennials, or the Gen Z, I think is the next gen, and a lot of them, or at least my perception is that entrepreneurship or to be an entrepreneur is like the cool thing to do. You don't want to be under the thumb of the man. And if we go back a couple generations, maybe to my parents' time frame, who retired like 5 or 6 years ago, the whole idea was to find a good job, go in, get a pension, maybe work yourself up to middle management, maybe upper management, God forbid, and then retire comfortably and put away 10 to 15% into your 401k, and all of that you work in a lane. And now entrepreneurship is like a thing. It's cool, whereas maybe it wasn't as cool. Maybe in the 90s, the 80s, if you were an entrepreneur, it was that you couldn't make it and you couldn't hack it in the corporate world. What's your take on that? Is that my perception, or is that just me, showing a little bit age?
No, I mean, you're dead on. It's funny that you mentioned that, work in a corporation, get the retirement. When I worked at NCR and I left, my mother, I kid you not, was upset at me for going to law school, because she was like, well, you work for a good company and they got a pension and you're going to be able to retire at 55. Yeah. I'm like, I want to be a lawyer, and I can't do that unless I go to law school. So, yeah, I mean, our parents' generation definitely saw security through corporations. Our generation, we ventured out a little bit, but this millennial generation and the younger one, we call them the I generation because they're the iPhone generation. They are more into entrepreneurship, and the reason why is technology has made it more possible. Technology has made it easier. When you and I were getting out of college, Taylor, I mean, Microsoft Word had just came to the campus, and we were just starting to use a desktop computer. But to start a business, you still had to have 4 walls and a sign and a telephone and a computer and a typewriter, and it was so much harder to start. Where now, really, what you need a website and you need a cell phone, and if you got that, you can start a business. And then with all this tech stuff going on with website development, app development, it just fits right. And these 2 generations coming up in this technology, they're far more comfortable with it than me. Like me trying to log on and get my headset working. I mean, that was a 5-minute thing today where, my son could come in here and be like, okay, you're good to go, Dad, and off we go. So they are so much more comfortable with it. So, people will say, well, is entrepreneurship a fad? Do you think it's going to come or go? I don't think it's a fad. I think the technology revolution that we've had, especially with the smartphone, I think entrepreneurship's here to stay, because the biggest appeal is that when you are your own boss, you get a lot more freedom. You get the rewards of what you do, you get the rewards of the hard work, but then you can also schedule the time of when you want to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think as those of us who have owned businesses or own businesses, that's one of the biggest things we enjoy about it, is that you do get the financial reward, but you also get the freedom. I mean, there's just something freeing about being an entrepreneur. And I think these two generations, they like that. It fits them.
I can see that. Taylor, I don't know if we've lost your audio, but your video has frozen on us.
I put him to sleep, it looks like. His eyes are closed.
It caught you while you were blinking. Maybe get off, get back on.
Okay.
That's the boomer solution. In the meantime, Kevin, a downside to choosing an entrepreneurial life. What if people are going that route, if they have learned from you at the CU Lead School of Business or Metro State, that gotten the tools, whether they have the type to be successfwe what are the potential potholes? What is the downside? Is there a price to pay? We're looking so much at the negative, we have to look a little bit at, or so much at the positive, we have to look a little bit at the negative as well.
Yeah, well, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. There's no certainty you're going to succeed. I always call entrepreneurs, or you have to eat what you kill, meaning if you're going to go out and buy groceries, you have to go out and earn that money. There's no paycheck that's guaranteed to come to you. And that's the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur, is you're not guaranteed to succeed. You're not guaranteed to make the amount of money that you think you should make. You might think you have $1 million idea and you only make $100,000 from that idea. And the other thing is, you got to be able to deal with the stress, the up and the downs of it. Some days you're working 16 hours. Mm-hmm. The other day you're working 20 hours. Then the other day you might only be working 4, but that's because you got no customers, and that's not good either. And so it takes an emotional toll. And I think that's one thing that people don't really appreciate about being an entrepreneur, is that the ups and downs, the peaks and the valleys, they're much more severe than you get with any, what I consider to be a normal job where you receive a check. Because it's all on you at the end of the day. And you have to have the emotional maturity, you have to have the emotional stamina to withstand going through those valleys. And sometimes you think it's going to be the end. I have an entrepreneurial friend where he started several startups. And he's told me there's been 3 times that he could think of where he had to get a mortgage on his house to make payroll.
Wow.
I mean, that's how close he was to coming to the end of it. And he pulled it out and he was successful. But, imagine taking a mortgage out on your home, coming home for dinner and telling your wife, I had to take out a $300,000 loan against our house to make payroll. It affects more than just you. It affects the people around you as well.
I've got a question I need to save here, because you made so many references to something that prompted another question in my mind. You talked about the toll, the price to pay, mortgaging the house to make payroll. Welcome, Taylor. You're back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You look much better.
Yes. The downside. Talk to the spouses of someone who is an entrepreneur and going through everything that you just mentioned. What does the spouse need to be aware of? What does the spouse need to do or not do to ensure the success of the relationship? with an entrepreneurial person?
Well, that's always the hard part because the spouse most of the times cannot relate to what the entrepreneur is going through.
Wow.
It's like, well, what do you mean? Why is that going on? As a spouse of an entrepreneur, you have to have just a lot of support. And the fears that you're feeling is sometimes you're going to have to keep those to yourself. Because the last thing an entrepreneur wants to be dealing with is the business is struggling or the business is going a different direction. And then you head home and then it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Where are we going to live? And what are we going to eat? And then now it's just stress upon stress upon stress where it's just compounding. Successful entrepreneurs have an optimism that they're going to succeed no matter what. It's almost narcissism to the point. There's a grandiosity about it. And I think as a spouse, you have to kind of accept that. You kind of have to keep it in check. It's important to keep them grounded, but if you keep an entrepreneur too grounded, then you limit the success, you limit the upside of it. Because only they know what they're going through.
Only they know what they're going through, but then is there some incumbent responsibility on the entrepreneur to keep the spouse informed, to bring the spouse along, to explain the issues and why they're issues?
Keeping the other person informed is key. Like my friend who I told you about, who comes home and tells his wife he mortgaged the house, that's probably not the way to handle it. There might have been more going on in the marriage than that. Better to say, hey, look, we got to make a payroll here. I got to get the money out of the house, but I got a venture capital firm that's going to come through here, or expected to come through in 90 days. And if it doesn't, well, we might be selling. And, it's kind of letting them know, it's getting them on board.
Okay. And then the one question that I don't want to forget, I push this to second. Is there a success ratio? What are you up against when you're an entrepreneur? If you look at all of the entrepreneurial ventures that go on, is there a generalization that a certain percentage of them will succeed and a certain percentage will fail? Is it for us or against us if we're entrepreneurs?
Well, statistics show that half of businesses fail after 5 years. A lot of people say, oh, well, half fell in a year. They actually don't. It's actually 5 years. Then what's interesting is after 10 years, the number of businesses that fail, it increases. It actually goes up to 80%. And so what a lot of the research shows, it's not necessarily if you talk to the entrepreneur who fails, they'll say, well, it was the market. It was COVID. COVID took me out. If you were Blockbuster, you would say, well, it was Netflix. What could we have done with it? But it's actually the entrepreneur. They're their own worst enemy when they get into this, because what happens from year 5 to year 10 is boredom can set in, complacency can set in, and entrepreneurs like the shiny new things, and they like to go out and do things. But when you start a business and it changes, you go from being the creative, idea master to actually being more of a manager, to being more of a daily caretaker, and so entrepreneurs lose their luster for it. And I would think that was what would happen with Blockbuster. They got these stores and they came out, we got this great idea, people can pick all these videos and VHSs, and boy, we got stores all over the country, we're even in the middle of Iowa, this is great. And then you check out, you're dormant, and here it is, and all of a sudden you hear about this video streaming, like, who cares, But if anybody should have seen this video streaming coming, it was Blockbuster. I mean, they were in the video movie rental business.
Yeah.
They had customers in their store. They had a market that they could talk to and say, what would you like to see in the future? What would like you see better? They didn't. They just went to boredom land. Along comes Netflix, Blockbuster's gone. And that's kind of the extreme example. But that's what happens with a lot of entrepreneurs. We call the phenomenon boom splat. So the business takes off, it's booming, it's doing great. Now you're kind of in the growth or the maturation stage of it. Boredom sets in, and then it just fails, and it falls on its place.
So it's interesting that you bring up like the Netflix and Blockbuster example, and even I think as late as 2006, in I think it was an 8K or a 10Q or something like that. I think it was some sort of an annual or quarterly report. It was explicitly mapped out in there that the CEO said, companies like Netflix, we are not concerned about. And only to find out that obvious. So to me, it's a lot of hubris that kind of sets in is we're not worried about that piece, and kind of getting a little bit too mighty and thinking that their stuff doesn't stink, so to speak. So how does that play in? Because one of the things, and this is a bit of a long-winded question here, but in the book, The E-Myth, about entrepreneurialism, the guy talks about how somebody takes it and, if you do what you love, then you'll never work a day in your life. But there's a bit of a misnomer there. And you see that kind of like cause some problems, because even if if you have the greatest pie making skills that have ever existed, should you open up your own pie shop, even if you don't have any of your own business skills?
No, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you can be passionate about playing the guitar, but it doesn't mean you're going to become a rock star with it. There has to be a market demand out there.
Right.
There has to be a problem that you're solving. Now, like pie, I mean, that's a pleasure thing. And so that's why those things can be harder markets to get into. People will buy for pleasure. They'll pay more for pain. I mean, if you can solve their pain, they'll pay more for it. So if you're going into pie, you got to be really distinct. And that's kind of the second thing we were talking about, marketing your competitive advantage. Why you're pie. And you might be the best pie maker around, but if you can't articulate and communicate that to the masses as to why your pie is the best, you're not going to make it. And the good thing is, when we're talking about whether entrepreneurs are born or made, you can take marketing classes and you can learn how to do that. So, there are things that, people can learn how to do to become an entrepreneur, but it's always just more than an idea. If there's not a way that you can market it that's very distinct, that people understand, what pain point does this solve, or what pleasure does this bring me, and why, they never launch, they never go off the ground.
And I don't know if you covered this while I was on my little leave of absence there, but again, kind of going back to where we started, and that was this idea of entrepreneurial endeavors being kind of like the cool thing to do. Is there a difference between an entrepreneur and a small business owner?
Not really. I consider them one and the same in terms of entrepreneur. When you were off the phone, I said an entrepreneur is somebody who eats what they kill. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you're going to go out and buy groceries to feed your family, you have to go earn that money yourself.
Right.
You don't wait until the paycheck comes in on Friday. So I think a small business owner is an entrepreneur as well. The scope, that really varies on what problem you're solving, what creativity do you have, are you somebody who can see into the future, like the unicorn entrepreneurs, I call them. Yeah. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. We were talking about this the other day. Nobody in 2007 was saying, you know what, we need an iPhone. We need a phone that we have apps and we can do banking on it and we can transfer money. No, I mean, we had cell phones where you could text. They had a keyboard. You got email, and then I think they finally let you search the internet, and we were all happy, right? I mean, I was like, well, this is pretty cool. I mean, I can do my email. I can text my wife that I'm running 15 minutes late, and I can go on the internet and find something. We weren't demanding that. We had a camera on the phone. We didn't say we wanted to plug in headphones and listen to music on our phone. I mean, we're all of the same generation. The phone was a phone. Why do I want to listen to music on my phone? It just didn't compute. But Steve Jobs is like, you know what? We can put all these things into one device that's lighter and faster, and people are going to love it. And so they're the unique ones. And that's kind of your difference between your small business owner and Amazon. Is Amazon, Jeff Bezos saw something that we did not see. We did not know that ordering things on the internet and having it delivered within a day would be cool. Or because I think a lot of us are like, well, you got to go to the store, you got to touch it, you got to see, you got to try it on. And now you can order it, try it on, ship it back. But Jeff Bezos, he saw this, and that's why he's the billionaire. Whereas the guy on the corner who's, who's solving a problem, like your convenience store. He's solving the problem that you need, milk or candy or gas or whatever, and you don't want to drive into the grocery store. He's solving that problem, but it's not as big of a problem and it's not as creative as what Amazon did.
With all the names you just mentioned, there's one that you didn't, and I truly, I'm fascinated by this discussion and what I've learned from you in just the last few minutes. With all of your experience, with all of your knowledge, would you be so kind as to share your inner feelings about Elon Musk?
Well, he's your classic entrepreneur. I mean, there's a guy that's got a lot of creativity. He's very good at merging two different things. I believe he had an engineering undergrad with a business MBA.
Yeah.
And so that's how him and I can't remember his partner's name, but that's how they came up with PayPal. Mm-hmm. Is that Elon's like, well, people need to be able to transfer money. That's a big thing. That's finance 101. And then because of his engineering background, he's like, well, we can program this. I mean, we can create a website. We can do that. So there's a guy that took two things and put it together. Then he's looking out and he's seeing the automobile industry. He's seeing the environment. Air's getting dirtier. Cars are probably the number one problem with it. And then he remembers a guy named Tesla. I mean, Tesla's a real guy.
Right.
He was an inventor at the same time as Thomas Edison. He worked for Edison with the light bulb. It's just that him and Edison had a falling out about how to do, I think it was AC current versus DC current. Now I'm getting way above myself. But it was actually Tesla who had the better idea. He had the safer idea. And so they departed. And so Elon's like, oh, well, Tesla talks about this battery convergence, zero emissions, and then so he takes it and he puts it in a car. So Elon's really creative that he takes two different things from different markets and he puts them together, and he does it in his way. The Tesla is all about his way. It's about the style of it. It's the sleek design, and the best thing about a Tesla, it's the inside of it. They're comfortable. I mean, you turn on the radio, you sound like you're in a concert hall. You got the computer screen. I mean, he just knows kind of those things. Now, is he the best manager at running the business? And so, Tesla struggled with that, because not only is he doing Tesla, but then he's on SpaceX, and then he's digging a hole in LA for an underground thing. So he's that classic entrepreneur. He's like, oh, I want to go after all the shiny things. But Tesla's at a stage now, it needs somebody who can run the day-to-day operation.
And that's something that you just talked about, was the person who has all the bright, shiny new ideas most frequently fails when it gets down to the day-to-day business of managing the business.
Yeah, because with PayPal, I can't remember his name, but it's the other partner who had the managerial business experience. So Elon left. He took his buyout and left, but the other co-founder, he's still there running it. He was very effective. Bill Gates had the Seattle Seahawks owner that just died, Paul
Allen?
I don't know.
Paul Allen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Paul Allen ran Microsoft. He did the day-to-day. Paul Wozniak did the same thing for Apple with Steve Jobs. So that's why a lot of times it's common you see two people start ventures like that, because usually one is really good at the creative, oh yeah, let's do this, let's do the shiny thing, and then the other one is, okay, we've got it, I'm going to make sure that the trains will keep running. Whereas now when you look at Tesla, I mean, Elon's been giving up a little more control, especially on the board, and that's helped, because he's really not the day-to-day manager.
Does that then reinforce the need for entrepreneurs to realize the value of delegating?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a management thought out there now. It's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and it's by a gentleman named Gino Wickman, and he wrote a book called Friction. And what he says is that when the entrepreneur comes in and gets the business going, kind of like Tesla, and you got the appeal, you got the venture capital in, and things are going good. At that point, the entrepreneur puts in a management team. And the management team's kind of a separate entity, and the entrepreneur is off by himself. And once a week, the leader of the management team reports back to the entrepreneur what's going on. But the day-to-day decisions of what's happening is rested with the management team. So it's a little different. What it's doing is it's taking a board of directors that we commonly know, but it's making the board run the business. Right. Rather than the CEO running the business, going back to the board. This way, it's CEO is now up here, and the board's going to run it, and they're going to report back to the CEO. And so that's kind of a popular style right now, and I think that's why you're seeing Tesla finally get going. Is they got some of that in place. And you can see it in the stock price. Once Elon wasn't there running it day to day, it's like, hey, we're making money.
So when you look at kind of and again, if you guys dove into this, I apologize, but we talked about this on Tuesday, and that was this concept of the intellectual entrepreneurialism, and you teach it. And what's the difference between that intellectual side versus the real thing?
Well, the intellectual side's like my classic thing I started with, 3 steps. Solve a problem, market your competitive advantage, and then nurture your clients. The non-side is what we were talking about when you were off the phone. It's the downside of entrepreneurship. It's the stress. It's the sleepless nights. It's the bank account getting low. It's the uncertainty of having to deal with it. It's the ability of being able to pivot and having the confidence to pivot when you have to. And that's the stuff that, we just can't teach in class. At least I haven't found a way. I mean, I talk about it and I tell them, I told them one night a month, every month when I had that law firm, there was a night I could not sleep. I was just awake. And it didn't matter what the balance in the bank account was. It could have all the money I needed, and it could have $5 in it. Sure enough, there was always going to be that one night like, oh God, is it over?
Sweating it out.
Is it done? Yeah, and so that's where, you have to have some emotional intelligence, the EQ. I can teach you the IQ of entrepreneurship. I can teach you the steps. I can teach you the plan. I can tell you how to go get a marketing class and all that. But the emotional intelligence, that really comes on you. Where are you at with your emotional development? Can you take the hits and keep on moving? Can you pivot without feeling like a failure? Blockbuster not wanting to pivot, they're probably like, well, gosh, if we give up all these stores, won't we look like we failed? Right. And that happens with it. But as an entrepreneur, you got to be like, well, to hell with what people think. The economy's changed. I'm doing takeout now. Right. I'm a 5-star steak restaurant, but I am doing takeout.
Hey, I had a Del Frisco's steak the other week, and it was very delicious, but I had it at my counter at home, not in the restaurant.
Yeah, my wife and I did that earlier in the summer, and we just went to the park.
There you go.
And it was nice, and it was a nice way to enjoy something that, I like Del Frisco's. It's one of my favorite.
Yeah.
But I never would have thought that I'd be eating it in a park, but it is what it is.
Well, it's fantastic. And so I guess the last question, and you've kind of touched on it, but is it easier today to be an entrepreneur based off of all of the things that you've said? I mean, the fundamental challenges still exist, but technology has changed. So is it easier to be an entrepreneur today, or is it just different?
We were talking about that a little earlier, and it's easier because of technology.
Right.
Back in the day, you had to have a brick and mortar store. You had to have signs. You had to have a phone number and yellow page ads and all that. Now, a cell phone, a computer, you can start a business. We're in such a high-tech world now that you can work from anywhere. And we have just such greater capabilities that I think the reason why entrepreneurship is so popular, it is because the technology has made it easier to do.
Right.
Even if you are just a freelance artist, if you're making a living, you can pay your rent and you can buy a car and eat food. You're an entrepreneur because you're doing it on your own. Right. It goes back to the definition earlier. It's about risk. If you are somebody who is taking the risk about making a living, then you're an entrepreneur. If you're working for NCR Corporation like I did, I had some entrepreneurial moments, but I wasn't an entrepreneur. I worked for this large company that gave me a salary, and I was guaranteed to get it so long as I was there. And I didn't have to worry about it. Every other Friday I got my check. But if you're out freelancing and you're working on Fiverr and you're trying to do logo design and all that, yeah, you're an entrepreneur, and there's more of them because technology has made it easier to do.
That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate taking your time today, and certainly apologize for the technical difficulties that we've had here. But any last parting words that would be helpful for our would-be entrepreneurs that are out there?
I think if you're thinking about doing it, know that fear is normal. Know that it's normal to be afraid. You should be afraid. If you're not afraid, you haven't thought your idea through clearly. There should be some gut-wrenching fear when you go out and do it. But the most important thing is do it. You have to go out and do it. You can do all the business plan out there and win competitions, but until you actually go out and launch, that's when you'll know if you'll be successful or not, and just be able to change with it. Because this is one of those things you learn more by doing, and you learn more through the failures of it.
Well, that is fantastic information and a wealth of knowledge from Kevin Heipel. As a way to connect with us, you can always visit us at presidentialwm.com, and that's a great way to contact us. Or you could use the offers tab and click the offers tab to schedule a one-on-one call with one of our advisors. We can go over how to put together a financial plan. That we talked about fears and covering an issue that you might have as an entrepreneur. Well, in our world, we provide a roadmap forward for clients and the people that we work with and serve. And so if you want to know how to get from point A to point B, which is typically having that financial independence, we can provide some insights and guidance on how to do that. So use the offers tab to select a one-on-one call with one of our advisors, and we would love to connect with you.
There you are, Kevin. You made it back. Thank you so much. One additional thing is if, like me, people are dying to hear and learn more from you, I'll be doggone. They can do it by enrolling in classes, correct? At Metro State and CU's
Yeah, you come and see Metro State, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Kevin Heipel. And the last name is Heupel. I'm the only Kevin Heipel on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find. So just connect with me there, and any questions I can answer or any consulting I can help with, I'm always available and willing to do so.
And you also have a book that's available on Amazon, right?
The consulting on Amazon? No, LinkedIn.
No, I thought you said you have a book, if I wasn't mistaken.
Oh no, my book was it was a book called Get Debt Free with Me.
Cool.
But I do consult with entrepreneurs. Anytime people are facing issues with whether they're trying to pivot or launch a venture, I'm available for consulting, and if you're interested in that, just go to LinkedIn, connect with me, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you.
And it's Heupel, correct?
Right. Yeah, it looks like Heupel. We say Heipel.
Very nice. Thank you so much. It's been a thrill. Let's do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, guys. It's good.
I love it. Remember, send your questions, send your ideas for future webcasts, Eagle's Nest webcasts, to webcast@presidentialwm.com. For Taylor Leary, I'm Keith Weinman from Presidential Wealth Management. Presidential Wealth Management securities and investment advisory services are offered through Forta Financial Group, Inc., a registered broker-dealer, member FINRA and SIPC.